Hey everybody, welcome to Purpose People. We're here with another episode and we've got an entrepreneur on board today. She's smiling and laughing as I say that, and we'll touch on that a bit later. But her name is Angela Duran, not Durant Duran or Duran Duran. It's Angela Duran, and we're going to be talking about all things purpose and the journey that she's been on. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So I introduced you as an entrepreneur. Did you notice that?
You did.
Yeah.
Maybe that's my new purpose.
It's your new purpose. Yeah. So we'll cover that a little bit later, but it's just an overview of what you spend your time on at the moment. And so what are you doing in life? You know, what roles do you have? Because you've got multiple roles, and I think that's one of the reasons why we wanted you on, because you've got multiple roles, multiple things that you're involved with, and yet you're happy, jolly and smiling.
Gosh, yes, multiple things. The first thing that comes to mind is mum, wife, as it were, as purpose in my world, and probably the big reason why I do what I do and why I've pivoted so many times and have been involved in so many different things. Plus, being a hugely creative person. I was given, I remember being at a networking meeting and somebody actually looking at me quite frustratedly and saying, well, what's the one thing that you do? And I'm like, well, I've never done one thing in my life. I don't know what one thing would be like. So the other things that I am involved in on the work side of things, started with voice, and I think it still goes through voice, but it's voice in different forms. So I work with senior leaders, managers around communication skills in corporate.
Yep.
That obviously through the pandemic got shelved a little bit as we all went into lockdown and everybody went into meltdown.
Yeah.
And that's coming back on the table because they realised that now they're just communicating all over the place, and what wasn't right before isn't right now.
Or being magnified. Yeah.
And in the middle of the pandemic, I actually started another business and pivoted again. But it was the business that, when you say entrepreneur, is probably the business that I'd been wanting to create probably for years, but I had not seen how to do it until that point, or the catalyst wasn't there until that point. And that's something called the Visible Club. And the idea of the Visible Club came from probably the work that I was doing for probably 10 years before, on and off. Spent 13 years as a voice teacher in the music industry for various different types of singers and speakers. Do we know
anyone we might have heard of?
Mostly unfamous people, but through my husband Paul, who's the more sort of famous music producer of the two of us, I think. I actually worked with. I think I started. I just had my daughter back in 2006, and about 3 weeks after having my daughter, I'd got Alex Penny, who was one of the screamers, shall we say, from the Automatic when they had their big hit Monster coming over the hill. So he was in my dining room.
Okay, yeah.
He was in my dining room having some lessons because I started my career as in a business career, and we'll get to the journey to that at some probably point, but I started that as a voice coach. And because my husband was in the music industry, I naturally fell into working with bands and singers and people in that direction.
Yeah.
And then I kind of expanded it and turned it into a private vocal studio. And you get all sorts of people. You get kids, you get hobby singers, you get speakers coming in, you get a whole raft of humanity. So probably between 2008 and 2017, I'd probably worked with nearly 1,000 people, voices, in that time, over that time, and built the business up.
So when you talk about voices then, obviously we're doing a podcast and that's on voice, but it's also visual. Using your voice to communicate, is that mainly communicating to teams or communicating in keynote presentations?
All of it. Yeah, so I mean, as I said, corporates come back on the table, but a lot of people sort of, shall we say, sneakily started to come to me from about sort of 2016, 17 onwards and go, don't suppose you could help me with? And it would be a presentation. It would be maybe a business presentation. It was an interview for a job. It quite naturally evolved from the music. And I wasn't marketing myself in any way, shape or form in the business community, or what I call the dark side, as it were.
Yeah.
But I noticed there were what I would class as my ideal client over the period of time became introverted experts. They were they were definitely more introverted.
Just for everyone out there, do you want to explain what the difference is between an introvert and an extrovert?
It's basically where you get your energy from.
Okay.
And so introverted, I think people see them as more shy, but they're not. They're often more process people. They are deep thinkers. They tend to make decisions later and slower. You will not find them as the life and soul of the party. They prefer deeper conversations. They probably, I would used to say, is they found their route to power by not having to present. So you'd find them in accounting, finance, engineering. You'd find them in tech. You'd find them in the behind the scenes jobs, not the front facing jobs.
Got you. Yeah. Yeah.
So they started to come to me because a lot of them were incredibly expert at what they did, and they felt like they wanted a bigger slice of the pie. But they had never actually spent a lot of time having to sell themselves or being in presentation mode. So they wanted a way to be more authentic in delivering what they were doing. And I really resonated with that because I was a huge introvert as a child, even though I'd got, both of my parents were on the stage. I have a famous uncle. I had a lot of... I'll get there.
Come on.
So I had a famous uncle. And so in the 70s, I was used to a lot of stage and a lot of theatre people. But naturally, I was quite shy when I was off camera and off stage. So I realised that I was much more introverted. So for me to start something like the Visible Club in the pandemic was rather ironic because I don't like to be visible a lot of times. But the idea for me was that it was about solopreneurship. It was really going on with the journey that we're talking about, which is how to be self-employed, how to have a sustainable business, and ride the roughs and the smooths. Because what I saw for me, say when I was meeting other solopreneurs or other people in business, startups, etc., going to networking, was there was a kind of fakery. There was a mask going up. They didn't know who to talk to. They didn't know what to ask. And there was a sense of you just either should know what you're doing or we had to kind of just keep faking it till we make it. And I knew a lot of them with a few tweaks here and there. I've started 3 ventures and I've got them all off the ground.
Yeah.
I may not have scaled them to sort of, big teams or anything, but I've always been able to take an idea and sell it. And and I knew people couldn't do that, and I wanted to help them do that.
So, you where you are as a person, there was this the introvert, the extrovert thing. Is that introverts, if they're doing the job and executing really well, you often find them getting promoted a lot.
Extroverts get promoted, and a lot of introverts get passed over.
Yeah, but what I found is that when introverts do get promoted, they then get put in a position.
Yeah.
Where they're speaking to large teams and they haven't got the communication skills to present.
Yeah.
That's a fair assessment?
Yeah. Or they leave corporate and they want to become a coach or a consultant and have a different lifestyle. Particularly the pandemic really showed that for people. They wanted different... They wanted to be with their family. And when I look back at it, I've done that. I've been with my, been at home, and I've run my business from home since my daughter was born, and I couldn't have done it without my husband's input as well. But I've had that lifestyle business. It's only now that she's now 16 that I feel I've got almost more permission to start to expand a little bit and fly. But I knew that they couldn't. They'd go into those coaching and consulting roles, and you'd see them, and they just couldn't communicate the value of the years of experience that they had actually acquired, and they didn't know how to put that into good language, a good message, etc. And I'd look at people, and I suppose that's the years of artist development. And when you're working with singers and you're working with people, and they don't know what their voice is, and they don't know who they are, and everybody starts off copying somebody else. Yeah. And that's one way to kind of discover yourself, is to copy a bit and then work out what's not you. But I spent 10 years helping people develop who they were, really who they were, their unique voice as a singer to start with, and with the songs. And it was not a million miles away to turn that into the business arena and start to look at somebody and go,
I agree.
this is your skills, this is who you are as a person, this is how we have to frame your uniqueness so that people in the marketplace can actually see that.
Well, it goes back to that thing, is knowing your voice. Yeah. And I think you talk about the mask piece, and the thing I realise is there are many people. It's like fake it till you make it. And the classic example of fake it till you make it was going to your bank manager dressed in a suit and tie, thinking that by wearing a suit and tie, the bank manager will be more convinced that the money that he's going to give you is going to be good.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And it has shifted now in the fact that bank managers have seen past that, by the way, and they want to know more about the idea and go into the depth or whatever. But that whole fake it till you make it philosophy, it runs out. It wears you out. Whereas if you can go into who you really are and just be that and be natural in who you are, all of a sudden then you not too far away from becoming passionate about what you do to therefore then just it's a natural extension of who you are. And now in the world of brand, for example, that's starting to win finally. The fake it till you make it, the greenwashing or whatever it could be to tell a story. It's got to be authentic. And I think for you is the first thing you said was I'm a mum and a wife.
Yeah.
And those roles say to me that those are the priority. And as a result of those being the priority, you're building a life around those things.
Hugely. And I never thought about it until I said it to you. That,
I know.
That's it. But my two values are family and faith. And I think that's probably what's driven me to either do or not do certain things.
Yeah.
As I said, I'll bring in it because I grew up in the 70s because my uncle was the famous UK ukulele player George Formby. So, So anybody that hasn't heard of George Formby, you need to go on YouTube because he is on there.
Can you play?
I can't play. I know, it's sad, isn't it? I was the tail end of the kids.
Why didn't he hand you the golden ukulele and you took it on? And
I know. My dad did try to teach me to tap dance.
So your surname was Formby?
Formby's a stage name. Now, the original George Formby actually was my grandfather, born in 1875, up in the north of England, and his name was James Booth. And Booth was a very common northern name just outside of Manchester.
Well, yeah, there's a few famous Booths out there.
And when he was sort of 12 years old, he had a real rags to riches. His story is quite epic. He had a real rags to riches story.
I'm just trying to drink this too.
7, do it. 7 years old, on the streets, started singing on street corners, picked up to do what we call the free and easies, which were the beginnings of the pub, because the free and easies were where you'd kind of go. And he started singing, and he got sort of taken up, and it started to get more gigs, as it were. He became one of the highest paid music hall stars of the turn of the century. And his name, George Formby, came from George. He kind of borrowed it, as it were, copied it from George Roby, who was a really big music hall star. Yeah. And Formby, because he saw a line of coal trucks going to Formby. And so that's where it came from. So the George Formby that everybody knows with the ukulele of the film stars is his firstborn son. My dad was second to last. They had 14 children, 7 survived.
Wow.
He died in 1921, aged 45, my grandfather.
Wow.
My dad was only 6 years old when he lost his own dad, as it were. And George Formby, the second, as it were, was already starting that career because he was, older in the generations. But they all went on stage. All of the kids went on stage. My dad was on stage all of his life. That's when he met my mum. She was a singer and he was on the stage. And I grew up in the 1970s with the likes of Frank Carson and watching amazing comedians just work an audience. And I can't remember not knowing what it was like to watch masterful comedians and performers really take an audience on a journey, know their stuff, be masters of their craft, and be able to actually have an audience in the palm of their hand. I watched that from the side of many UK stages.
And I think for me, as I get more and more involved in the whole speaking and public speaking and all that sort of world, what I've started to do is I'm watching a lot more now of comedians and stand-up and stuff like that. I show my age now, but I do enjoy Tommy Cooper.
Oh, masterful.
It was just so clever. And
timing.
Every now and again, I'll watch it on YouTube. It's just timing is nuts.
Timing.
Where is it? It's in Wales, isn't it? Is it? Caerphilly. They've got a big statue up in Caerphilly of Tommy Cooper. And I was like, oh, reminds me, go back to do that. But the point of it is that there is a mastering of your craft in terms of telling stories. And that's what you're helping people to do. What I find really interesting, because obviously I know you, but I know you quite as a talker and you're always out there and you're laughing and joking, whatever else. But to say that you're an introvert.
Yeah. I've learnt to be what I call an introverted
expert. So do you lay down in a
expert.
dark room after stuff like this?
I do, honestly. I do lay down in a dark room. I need lots of time off. And sometimes more so, and we'll probably get into that, you know, some of the personal journey that we've gone on in our family over the last sort of 10 years, even more so. I can do this, I can do camera, I can do stage. There's a level of being able to be yourself and hold a little bit of you back. Yeah. And I think there's an importance to that, because I think sometimes what I see that I don't like is maybe the thing that I'm most uncomfortable with is, I would say, all of the kinds of oversharing that I see on social media.
Do you know, I was thinking that this morning.
I can't handle it. It doesn't sit well with me.
I saw something this morning and I was like, everyone's a victim. It's
a way to sell stuff now.
It's not meant to be horrible because there's stuff that everyone's gone through tough times, but I don't know. I was seeing stuff that we consider natural and normal is almost one step away for I had to get up this morning and go to work. Everyone feels sorry for me. And it's like, well, no, that's part of life. Yeah. You know, and then they're trying to pivot that into a narrative story. So, but that goes back to being inauthentic. It seems like I see a formula. So now I'm leveraging the formula to get business. Right. And if you're in that world like you are and I am, you can spot it a mile off.
I just don't sit comfortable with me. It's why I think I'm more comfortable with things like this, having the conversation, doing a podcast, putting certain videos out or speaking publicly, because I've always said one of the best ways for people to get business is to get out and speak publicly, and yet the shocking amount of people that will not speak is unbelievable.
And that's what so this is what happened to me. I was at an event a while ago, and they were all talking, and he was saying, the guy that was leading it was saying, he literally asked about 100. He had a survey about 100 people. How do they get their biggest clients? And 80% of that room turned around and said, from a public speaking gig. And then the penny drops. I went, I hate being in front of the camera. I hate that. But if I want to, see, my driver is like impact and influence and helping people find purpose. If that's the case, I'm going to have to get used to speaking in front of the camera. Now, the weird thing for me, I kind of got over I can speak in front of 500 people. But speaking down that camera like that, even now, I struggle. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because it just seems like too intimate.
Should I give you a tip?
Yes.
Do you want a tip?
Yeah.
Look directly into the light and then imagine that audience. Imagine your 500 people. Visualize yourself on the thing that you're most comfortable with, because behind that is 500 people. They're just not. You just can't feel their energy up front.
There you go. Write it down. That's going to be in our show notes. But that's the thing. And it's stuff like this that when you are presenting, like for me, I'm learning as I go. And, you know, I'm sure if I watched, we're only podcast 24, 25 that are live out there. I think we've filmed about 40 odd now. But I bet when I look back, I'll be like, ooh. And it's like knowing those things. If I know that going forward, I'll look and go, that's where the change happened because someone gave me that bit of advice. And that's obviously your skill. And we don't understand that those are people like that out there that can give you those hints and tips. And we're trying to figure it out. So what would be your top, let's do it now. And then we'll go talk about family and faith, because that's another load of story. 5 tips to someone speaking in this sort of environment. What would you give them? Okay,
number one, the first thing is most people are going to be using their iPhone to be doing an awful lot of things to start with. This is not going to be the setup for the majority of people to begin with. Yes. So take your iPhone, make sure that it's actually on landscape, not portrait, as it were, to start with, so you can upload it. And the biggest thing that people do is because they can't help but love themselves, you know. They've got the courage to go and do it, and then they go and smile at themselves. And you can actually see that the video, the eye line is not in the eye line of the of the camera. They're looking at themselves on the phone. So the first thing that you have to do is you have to look into that little black or that little green or red dot that is your actual video camera on your phone, and do not look at yourself or smile at yourself just to check that you're really beautiful while you're doing this. Take the focus off yourself, look in there. So that's the first one, look in the camera. That might seem the most obvious thing in the world, but you go and watch a bunch of videos everywhere now on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, whatever, where people are actually not looking at the camera while they're speaking to you.
The flip conversation on that is that the camera on an iPhone, the better camera is on the back of the phone, not the front of the phone.
Indeed.
So that would fix that problem. But people are like, but I want to see myself.
They want to see myself.
Which is...
But it's not about you, darling.
Of course not. Yeah, no, I love it. Love it. So that's really cool.
So, the bit before that is about you, when you actually are speaking to people through that camera, just stop thinking about you, because it's so easy to get caught up in insecure thinking at that point and start to decide, well, what am I thinking about? Can I remember it? We're back on you again. It's not. Once you're on that stage, it's like walking out onto a main stage. You know, any comedian, any performer, all of their insecurities are standing in the dressing room and are standing at the side of the stage. At the moment you walk on the stage, you're on, and you focus forward and you forget everything. Yeah. There will be things that go wrong. I can't remember. I mean, of all the stages that I've been on, there's been some really scary moments of the orchestra move. You know, I spent 20 years as a classical singer, and the orchestra starts playing and you literally can't remember the first line in your head, and you just go, I'm about to be humiliated in front of 1,000 people. And then suddenly all of that training that you've done comes out, the one chord happens and your mouth opens and out it comes out. Wow. But there are some really scary moments and things do go wrong, but that's not the point. The point is you carry on and you face forward all the time. Yep. The bit that people don't do, which is why they don't think, and not because I'm here to kind of promote public speaking, but it's a general, what I call innocent ignorance of people, that we're all very skilled in what we know, but not in what we don't know, of course. Yeah. So when it comes to public speaking, it's the bit beforehand. Think about it. Would you go, if we gave you some music now and said, right, here's a microphone, here's some music, we're going to put you live on YouTube, you would go, even if you were fairly confident, let me run through this and have a rehearsal. Yeah. But that's not what people do. They either do one of two things, avoid it or wing it. Yeah. Yeah. That's no way to get mastery of anything, you know. So wing it, your extroverts tend to wing it. Yeah, your extroverts wing it. Yeah. Because they're confident and they're charismatic, and they realise that if they use their energy in that kind of magnified way, they can generally get themselves through quite a lot, and they've probably sold quite a lot as well. Yeah. But that's not mastery, and it's not true confidence, actually. Okay. You know. Nice. So the bit before that is you deciding, well, what am I saying? Why am I saying it? Why does this actually need to be said? Yeah. Because there's a quote from an acting coach called Patsy Rodenberg, and I should probably have shares in her books because I've recommended them so many times. But she really talks about how when you say a word and you release it, you release the power of it, and it becomes truth in the world. So we ought to be really careful on exactly what is being said or released
words
out of our mouth.
Words. Yeah, agreed.
So what are we saying? Why are we saying it? Who are we saying it to? What's the purpose of it? Where is it going? And sometimes you just need to have that time, jot down some notes, etc. The memorization is an issue for people, because if they're not in the acting world or the voice world where I am, where you're used to memorizing things and regurgitating it, people get worried about memorizing it. But so a tip is sometimes take some time, write the whole thing out and then turn it into bullet points. Oh, I haven't got time for that. Well, if that piece of content is going to go out for a long time after, why haven't you got the time for it? It's probably going to take you 30 minutes. Yeah. But what it will do is it will settle you, it will focus you, and it will actually really form your own true opinions of what you're saying, and not just everything else that everybody else is saying. Just on that was one of the things that helped me with the whole purpose journey. So I write a blog every single week. And often what I'm going through or think that's helping me process. So by the time I come to a podcast, I've already been writing like 2 or 3 blogs where I've, the trends in brand, the trends in this or whatever come out. And so by the time it gets to here, it's almost the blog has prepared me to accentuate some of the key points that I'm finding
with brands and purpose. For example, we were talking with someone before on podcasts, and we were talking about, the trends in brand where they're not actually showing the product. It's like more about the story and the message and stuff like this. I've done a lot of writing and reading around it. So, we hit that vein because I've got that knowledge and I've digested it. And I think there's massive amounts of people. I think writing, whether you're good at it or bad at it. And I've got an amazing editor, so that makes me look good with my wife. But writing things down, I think everybody should do it as a point of process, just generally. If you're a musician, whether you want to speak on stage, writing things down and going through that, as you said, half an hour or whatever, formulating your thoughts is massive.
Well, it's a bit like the Navy SEALs quote, isn't it? Slow is smooth and smooth is fast. Is when we write down, and I don't mean just type it into a Word document, put it in ChatGPT or Jasper or something else. But the act of writing slows you down because you can't do it as fast as typing. Yeah. You have to think. You have to go, is this important? Should I? And I think for people that are, particularly at the minute, it is noisy out there. There's a lot out there. And I, for one, completely understand when people want to go, do you know what? I think I'd rather, go and watch a bunch of learning YouTube videos, or go and do something else in my business, a bit of admin or something, or, walk the dog or something other than the thing that needs to be done. I'll hold my hand up to that, because sometimes you're looking at what everybody else is putting out there, and either people... this is probably a woman thing, because I see it as sometimes a huge kind of thing around the female entrepreneur side of things, is why would anybody listen to me? There's a real lack of confidence in their own voice and in their own opinion, for lots of reasons, but there is that lack of confidence. But having, formulating a thought and then having the courage to put it out, finding a safe space. That's why I created the Visible Club, so that people could have that safe space to learn and grow and develop and work that out, and then find smaller spaces. But I really do believe that if you are intentional around your visibility and around what you're doing, you shouldn't just be posting for the sheer sake of it to people that are a bit like pearls before swine, I hate to say, is because you're going to get feedback of all sorts. So find safe spaces where you can get your courage and your confidence up first. So
just talk us through where we are. Number one,
actually look in the lens of the camera, not at yourself. Number two, actually write out your opinions full hand beforehand, turn them into bullet points and memorise them.
Okay.
Number three. Going live. I was like, what's the most important thing that three things. Going live. When people do get the courage to, say, do a Facebook Live, or they go live, any kind of video, LinkedIn, whatever it is, or even YouTube, most of the time, people are waiting for other people to join. This is a particular Facebook Live thing, in groups or whatever, and they'll go, I'm just waiting for everybody to join in. And I'm like, I'm watching this on a replay. I don't want 3 minutes of you waiting for people. So a bit like a comedian, you've got less than probably... In a comedian's got 20 to 30 seconds. On a video day today, you've got less than 10 seconds to keep you've got to buy attention in 10 seconds. So you have to, that little line that goes 3, 2, 1, and then it shows that you're live. Yeah. That's the bit that you breathe in. And then as soon as you go live, you go, my name is Angela. The title for today's topic is such and such.
Because it helps the replay. Because one of the things I've seen with Joe Rogan podcast, it's a bit smaller than us at the moment. We're just trying to catch us up. But they literally put the sting at the beginning, and then they go straight in. And they've already been talking about stuff prior.
Right.
So they allow them to talk, and then they just run it. And he then just gives reference to the fact that now we've started.
Yeah.
So it's almost like they've done a preamble, a warm up, and then they're just into it.
Right.
And so you might miss. You've almost been delivered from that.
Right.
Waiting for the beginning of something. It's just like bang, we're straight in it and things. So I like that. It's great.
Well, it's because I think there's a kind of idea that there might be people out there waiting to listen to us. And I think we should maybe assume that there isn't to some degree, but that we could catch a few people. And partly, I think, when you get video engagement things, and it said, if you get them longer than 10 seconds, they class it as an engagement. Well, you haven't even got your content out by that point. So what is it? So within that 10 seconds, you've got a couple of things that are happening. You've got what I call the book title, because books are sold on book titles, not content.
Yeah.
We don't even know what the content is yet.
Yeah, of course.
So it's sold on a book title. It's sold on your tone of voice, your body language, and your environment that you're doing it in.
Yeah.
And so that, to me, that doesn't mean about it being a perfect environment,
No.
but your tone of voice and your body language and your energy right in that first 10 seconds is what's going to make the difference before anything else.
Yeah, 100%. No, I get it. So so I think there's that element of, they talk about the hook, don't they? Like when you're pitching, it's the hook. It's like learning very early on to deliver something that holds people's attention. Right. That say, today we're going to be talking about, I want to find out more about, which is what comedians do, right? They start and they go, and almost they then go on their side journey and then they wrap it up later on.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And it is that. It's like, think about, if we paid 30, 40, 50, 100 quid to go and watch somebody, you're probably going to, give them at least 10, 15, 20 minutes, if you know them. Comedians, if they don't know them, it's brutal. It's hard. I mean, think of, when I was... I
used to love going to comedy clubs, and I obviously don't that much anymore. But yeah,
it's brutal, isn't it?
It's brutal. Yeah, if there's somebody there you don't like on stage, it's just they die on stage.
They die.
The crowd are horrendous.
They are. I mean, that's where it started. Music hall. That's where the shepherd's crook is. They just reach it out and they just pull them off the stage. There was no time for it. They were hard-working people, generally in the north of England, in the factories, and they were there to have a good time. And you better be able to go out on stage and give them that good time. So there's a little element of me, maybe, that's old school, that kind of... I'm not that indulgent of people wanting to indulge themselves on their own behalf on my feed.
It's even when I've seen the same thing in church where the person, the guest speaker that speaks, and he says one degree out of the teaching or the theology and that's it. Like it's like a comedy club. They're dying on stage.
They
need the rescue.
Know your audience, I think, is the answer to that, 100%. Isn't it?
Okay, so that was 4. We're on.
That was 3. 3 was that tip around that 4 would be kind of know your audience. Part of that, know your audience, because knowing your audience means that you will be sensitive. And again, being non-partisan to some degree, there are times when you have to know some discernment as to when sharing your opinion is actually the right thing to do, and where being more sensitive to who's in that audience, particularly if it's a guest, if you're a guest audience, if you've got your own audience and they're your followers and they're following you because of that, well, no problem, as it were. But guest audiences you're actually in doing 3 things here. You're helping the audience. Yep. You're actually making the person who took you on in that interview look good. You want them to look good. So I always say with speakers or speaker agents or people booking people, do not annoy the host. Because if they will not book you back,
I mean, so far we want to invite everyone back. That's just for everybody out there. No, Angela, you're welcome to.
Yeah, but there's 3 people to make look good here in any talk, in anything you're doing. You, hopefully, and what you're about and representing. The audience, you want them to feel connected to you and that they've got something worth their time. Because the word to pay attention here actually means something. Paying attention means that it's going to cost somebody something.
Yeah, agreed.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the person who has either... I don't know whether it's a corporate HR person that's booked you, whether it's a podcast that's booked you, but the person that you are doing it on behalf of to their audience, make them look good. Because there's 3 people in this. I've had people come into our group. They are not coming into our group again, and it felt like they sort of trashed the audience a little bit. They had such their own agenda that actually there's a zero respect for everybody can win out of this.
I noticed there is a gap. Maybe there's something that you could teach or whatever, or even me, but there's a gap when you go from one-to-one to one-to-many. And the best thing, what I will talk about that is about the audience, is that in the same degree, when you go networking, you've got the people with the business cards looking to sell. Then everyone goes, no, I'm not buying off that person. Aren't they arrogant? And then that person goes, networking doesn't work. I see the same in chat. So Facebook would release chat on groups, for example. So I switched it on to experiment just to see what feedback we would get. And the overriding feeling is everyone's trying to sell. Yeah. So there's no relationship. You don't do that normally, surely. That's not a normal thing to do. You have a conversation with someone. You don't walk up in the street to someone and go, by the way, I run a brand marketing. Do you want a brand? And you haven't spoken to them. You haven't connected with them. And I think sometimes it accentuates these chat groups and things like that. It accentuates that bad behavior. And it's hard to call out because, people might dive on you and whatever else. But there's a definite lack of ability out there of people learning how to talk to crowds, engage with their audience, and show up to benefit them. Where, as you said, there may be an order, make you look good, but that should be the last thing. Mm-hmm. The first thing should be the audience.
Absolutely. I think just on that with groups and chats is the thing that just came to mind when you were talking about that was the sense of urgency and desperate nature that we've got going out there.
Yeah. DMs on LinkedIn.
Yeah. Well, there's a long and a short game to anything, isn't there?
Yeah.
And I think as business people, we have to play the long and the short game. I played the short game for a while, which was not necessarily being that entrepreneur and scaling the business, etc. And doing the short-term things was the jobs that were right in front of me, as it were, rather than what I call the long-term building game. What I see happening around the communication on chats, in groups, etc., is there's a veiled attempt to try and be helpful, but really it's manipulation to try and sort of to sell. Okay, so that goes on. It goes on a lot in female stuff, as it were. But the reason behind it is, I think, either the amount of courses, groups, and programs that have sprung up in the last 5-10 years, as it were, of people selling courses, etc. online. I don't have any problem with people selling courses online, but what we have is it's almost like, and maybe this is the thing around entrepreneurialism, is that there is a right way to do business, and it's my way in my program, and you can get where I am if you just do these 7 little easy steps, as it were.
It's like reverse. It's like hindsight university. Let me come up with the 12 steps that I learned, which you didn't actually do, by the way, on the journey. It'd be much better you tell her, how did you cope through the ups and downs, rather than these are the 7 things you did to get to become a millionaire. No, more interesting is, how did you stay sane during this process? Right.
Yeah. So when I look at them, it all just feels very, very odd to me. Because you start to see somebody's programs going on, and the next minute, all people's LinkedIn little bios will be changed to a certain thing, and you can kind of see it as to how many people are in that, group at the moment. And I'm like going, the whole point for me is so that you think for yourself, and you do become, back to that first question about your unique expression of your voice and your sense of experience and your understanding your stuff in the world. And because everybody's saying, no, you won't be a success unless you do it like this, because it's done to sell something, there are shortcuts, but there's no fast track. No. And I think it's this idea that actually you can't trust yourself to do the journey. You can't trust yourself. You've got to buy into this program. You've got to do this. And the amount of times I call it waking up under the sweetie wrappers again. And I'm like, and you go, oh man, I've done it again. Because you get in there and you realize, like, no, this is not unique. This is like, yes, eat the hay, spit out the sticks. But there is a lot of people that they just want to follow a formula for success.
Yeah.
Well, that's like, that would be Stock Aitken Waterman. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you get the right team around somebody that's a willing participant, that team can make somebody a success, as it were, certainly it did in the music industry. But when it comes to business, when it comes to changing consumer marketplaces and mindsets and buying habits and your own personal lifestyle and your own personal journey of why you're doing it, there is no 7-step formula. There is no, you step on this one and this one and this one and you're home and dry. It's like that you can't avoid the pain of rejection, of failure. In fact, some of my greatest changes have been because of failure, not because of the successes.
And I see the education market miss that thing. Where I see the education market succeed is to say, let me give you the tools on the journey. Right. So how do you cope with that? How do you, a natural progression of you raising your authority and your brand is learning how to write a book, for example, or how do you communicate like this, for instance. That's why this is interesting, and the people that are listening, this can help them in them being able to express who they are. That's interesting to me, rather than do this, do that, do that. Double your price. There's a classic one. Double your prices. Okay, that's a great statement, but how and what are the nuances for me to be able to do that? And actually, if you go to someone and go, oh, it's going to cost you $2,500, whereas before you were charging, I don't know, like, you know, £1,000 for something, and you aren't confident, they ain't going to buy from you.
No.
So you've got to realize, first of all, is to go in internally and go, how much value do I bring? And it was only when I was sat down the other day and I was like, I didn't realize, but I've been in brand 27 years, which sounds nuts, as young as I am. No, but 27 years, I should be charging more than if I'm involved, than when I only had 10 years worth of brand. Do you see what I mean?
Right.
And sometimes it's that case of writing things down and going introspectively. But it's like, whatever I educate a tool that can help someone get to where they're going, rather than a bullet point that just says, do this and that's it. I think it's just lazy.
It's kind of innocent. It's innocent on the part. I say innocent because we're already way too self-critical of ourselves, and we don't need anything else to beat ourselves over the head with a stick with most of the time. But the innocence is that there is again, like you say, these statements, sound bites and quotes from people that sound true until you pick them apart. And I kind of go, well, it's got to be a truth everywhere or it's not a truth anywhere. And things like, success leaves clues. I'm like, well, maybe. But sometimes if you're like, say, I know, Steve Jobs with Apple, there was no precedent with some things that some people are bringing into the world and bringing in the idea. And sometimes there is the only clue there is the fact that it's in you and you can't see the direction, except it feels like a North Star to go in that direction, and it makes no sense to anywhere else because there hasn't been a proven track. We wouldn't climb mountains, we wouldn't go to new places if we need pioneers. Pioneers don't have a clue.
but one thing I'd say is, and I think what a lot of people don't do is, let's say you're going to study Steve Jobs, right, and find out about Steve Jobs as a person who's unbelievable in some areas but not so good in others. But also, imagine putting yourself at his age and then find out what he was looking at that age, because that's how you get a better picture for how he come to those conclusions. Right. So, for instance, the whole thing with typography, which is the big thing behind the operating system, he was so into various different cultures and aspects that informed his design. So it wasn't that he was following this particular person. He was passionate, and he studied certain things and certain tools that actually aided him on the journey. He collectively brought it all together and made it into software and pitch. But
influence, isn't it? It's influence. Exactly. It's what's influenced and what's inspiring and what's influential to you. And I think that's where you have somebody has to have the courage to go, that's where I'm going to take my inspiration from. And I'm going to forge something fresh for me. And that's the scariest place in the world for people to be at. Yeah. Because there isn't a precedent for it. There are models, there are ideas, there are good practice here and there that you can pick on, milestones. But there is generally, I kind of think, everybody's path is so unique. And the reason why we're probably not happy with the path that we're on is because we are too busy looking at everybody else's path. I'm guilty of that, which is looking at everybody else's path and going, oh, maybe I should be on that one.
So talking about, so we've done 4. What's the 5th one?
I would say the courage to be clear on your why, on your opinion, on your standing for your truth. The courage to stand for a truth. I don't know about you, but there's so many times when I hold myself back from saying what I really feel, because you don't want to offend people, because I've been brought up to be a people pleaser, because we're too scared of somebody criticising us for what we're saying or losing out on it.
But that's interesting, because that's the audience thing. It's being mindful of your audience, but it's also recognising you can't please everyone. So it's saying, well, you might have an audience, but it can't be the whole world.
Right.
But if you bring that audience down and say, if I am on this, for example, you just by talking about that. So, for instance, you said family and faith.
Yeah.
So if I talk about faith, I've already not alienated, but I've already made clear that there's a certain people that will tune out, and that's fine. But what we do is, I can't talk about this because I'm going to alienate them. No. Talk about this because there's a whole load of people that want to hear about that and how you apply it and how you bring it into life. Right. So I think sometimes you have to, with your voice, just by standing up and having the courage to say, I'm well aware that if I go down this route, I'm going to have to ignore. Yeah. It's not that you hate them because that's the way it's perceived. Yep. No, I don't hate them. I'm just saying, for me and the message that I carry, I'm going to have to speak to them. Yep. And by speaking to that people, it's not going to be for everybody.
Yeah, and people really mistake the two, because I kind of call it a message matrix that people don't quite get. There's a great quote by Frederick Bruckner, and it's your greatest passion, your greatest passion meeting the world's deep hunger. And I think for me, that's the journey of entrepreneurism that I'm interested in, is what is coming through me as a passion, what is being shown to me through my eyes, what opportunities am I seeing that I know that my skills, my experience, my heart is being nudged or drawn towards, and what is their deep hunger, and then meeting in the middle of that with a service that I want to deliver, or I want to be able to be involved in, that feels congruent to me and the truth that I'm standing for, and it meets their need, not any other agenda.
So those are the 5 things. So if you can't remember them, you can rewind them back and you can replay them again. But you talked about, because in the midst of all these things that you're doing and the value that you add, you've got a family, and it gets difficult and it gets tough at times. I mean, as I said, you're very positive, very outgoing. Do you want to share a little bit about the background to what that you've been through and what you're working through? Because the reason I'm saying that is because life isn't always easy.
No,
it's not always easy.
No.
It's sometimes getting up and doing life when it's difficult and moving things forward. So and then what would you say to those people that are going through a tough time?
So if I do a little bit of an overview and then a deep dive, overview journey is 2000, and what you talked initially about, what even got, what's the purpose that even got you into business. I couldn't think of anything else in my life. I had spent probably years trying to be, a stage performer and musician, and to a greater or lesser extent had done it. Hadn't become a sort of famous as my family or anything like that, but I was heading in that. But there was always these jobs in between when you weren't working and weren't auditioning, but it felt like I was on a treadmill. And then in the end, I was kind of early. I got to my I didn't even realise that family was probably one of the deepest values that I'd got until I got to my early 30s. And I had one of those moments where I thought, you know what, do I want to be trying for a big career, or do I want to be in my 50s without a family? And I knew I wanted to have a daughter and a family. So I remember the day...
Which society says... Often that's not the thing to do. No. You should be a career woman. You should go for it.
Go for it. Don't have any kids.
But the foresight that you've had is that I am going to be in my 50s and I'm going to have kids. And the reason I'm interjecting is because imagine being of that age and then look back and go, I wish I'd done it a different way.
Oh, well, you couldn't have done, then the kids aren't there, isn't it? I mean, and I knew that's what I wanted. And I maybe looked around at a couple of my peers. They were hankering after a career that just wasn't going to happen. And I thought, I just don't want to be in that place. So I remember kind of crying for a week and letting what I thought was the dream die, But actually, long time later, I found out it probably wasn't my dream. It was probably my mum's. Okay. Good, and I never really realised that until many years later, until some of my skills started to come out. But I settled down. I got a job. I was selling houses. Realised I was actually very good at selling houses and property and all sorts. And my husband was running a large recording studio in Cardiff, and he was sort of the more famous one of the two of us. And I had my daughter 2006. And 2008, as my mum was getting increasingly frail in Birmingham, and wouldn't move to Wales, and lots of people are doing what I was doing, which was elderly parents, young children, the sandwich generation, I think they call us, as it were, where we've got elderly parents and kids, as it were, and we're trying to do both. And I was driving back from Birmingham one night after they had discharged my mum from hospital too early, and I had a catastrophic car crash. And it was, when I say catastrophic, it hit... I was sort of 80 miles an hour, 11 o'clock at night, hit the central reservation, car careered across 3 lanes, hit the crash barrier on the left, launched my car 15 feet into the air over a fence at the side of the road. I took out 2 trees and I landed on the passenger side, and the car was sort of propped up against a tree, and I was suspended in the air by the seatbelt.
Wow.
And
how did that happen?
Did it.
Just
tired, how did that happen?
Yeah.
Tired, emotional exhaustion.
Yeah.
A bit like trying to live a life that you're not living the life that you want. You're just trying to keep everybody happy. You've got a young baby. You've got bosses at work that are firing other people, and you're doing 3 jobs and you're taking the work home with you. Because I was kind of fastidious. I was responsible for whole building sites, so it was kind of like a precursor to being self-employed. I had the autonomy. Yeah. Had to get the work done, and of course I had to keep leaving and driving 150 miles from Cardiff to Birmingham.
Wow.
To get to my mum. And that's only sustainable for a short amount of time. But what was probably more miraculous about it was that I survived it.
Yeah.
And I not only survived it, when I hit the crash barrier, I felt I heard a really loud voice on the inside of me that said, "Stay completely still and do not move." And although, I made the newspapers, woman cut from car, that kind of thing that meets the local newspaper. But what had got me probably more scared was not the accident, although that did lead to a kind of PTSD response that I needed sort of 7 months of trauma therapy for. But I didn't break a bone.
Wow.
And they cut me out of the car, and I was out of hospital 1 week later. And now everybody says, "Well, what were you driving?" First of all, I had a Volkswagen. I had a really
German
good
car.
German car. I had a German car, but I ended up speaking to the chaplain in the hospital. I didn't come out scot-free. I had some retina damage and a little bit of tissue damage where I'd been sort of on the seatbelt, and they had to cut me out, and that was traumatic. But what was traumatic was that I'd survived it. And I couldn't get my head out of the fact that I shouldn't have been here. The magnanimous nature of that accident. Both the fire crews, the police we just don't know. Can we have your lottery numbers? I think one of them said as they were cutting me out. Because you're just about the luckiest woman living. And I think that scared me because I knew that I now had to get on purpose.
Yeah, it's like a second chance.
That had to be on purpose. And actually that's quite a scary thing. It's actually easier sometimes not to be on purpose.
And interestingly enough, I do say that to a lot of people, is that once you discover it, now you have the responsibility to do something about it.
Right.
And there are a whole load of people that rather watch Netflix with their fingers in their ears and never do anything about it. Right. So amazing. So,
well, I hope nobody ever has to have that level of, wake-up call in their life to kind of get on purpose. But I certainly needed it. And it was through this counselling where I found myself saying to the therapist, well, I just don't know whether to try and make it more in music or whether to go into business. I quite like the business side of things and like and I feel pulled one way and I feel pulled the other. Yeah. And at the time she just said, well, why don't you do both? Well, of course, I'd never actually thought of that. I mean, like the most obvious thing. So at the time I thought, well, I can't go touring, I can't go auditioning, I'm not in a well state, as it were, I just scared my family, beyond, as it were, with an 18-month-old baby. So I went home and I thought, well, I'll open a voice coaching studio. And I wouldn't be sitting here now if I hadn't have started that version of who I am as a purpose person. I never thought I wanted to do anything else outside of that. You know, I built it up, sort of the first 3 years, built it up. And then just when you think that, you know, for me, I built it up and I thought that's all I'll ever do. My husband was running a good studio at the time. Things were going well. Yeah. And then Paul got diagnosed with kidney cancer. And it was stage 3, nearly stage 4, because they'd missed it at the GP. And that threw our world into confusion. My daughter was 5. Paul had to have his kidney out. And although he went back to work afterwards, that started a catalyst of consistent crisis and change for us as a family, because they got out what they could see. Now, we've been very, very fortunate that cancer has been a 10-year journey so far, and he's still here. But every 2 years, there was another cancer came up somewhere else in the body. And that went on every 2 years. And I knew I also had that point where it was like, well, you've either got to stay under the radar and just cope with this and kind of maybe even go on benefits or just not really raise this, or you've got to become the main breadwinner at some point in the future. And there's that pull in me that goes, big deep breath, like diving into cold water and go, let's do it. I think it's going to take 2 to 3 years for me to try and move myself into that position, which we did. What I think people don't, I see a lot of people sometimes stop their business journey when there's a lot of crisis going on. And particularly women, because they are the people I know, hugely family, and people say, oh no, family comes first, you know, and people will stop the business journey. But there was a seed in me in 2012 that kind of hit me, and I thought, well, I don't ever want to be in this position again where I have to have a choice, where I have to go and work with a client, and I can't go and sit at the bedside of my husband who needed me at that point. But I didn't know what to do with it. It was like the seed was, there has to be a way for me to work myself out of my business. But I was the specialist and people came to me for me. And at the time, because we had, you know, there was another cancer and then my mum was ill again, it was just this constant wheel of that can become, even your self-employed journey can become like a job where you are just 24/7 doing the thing that's bringing in the money right now, and you go, there's got to be another way out of this.
Of course.
So it wasn't really for us until I think life has handed me, God has handed me some really interesting moments that have just went now kind of thing, like now. The one that really started to catapult me out of that space was 2017. When it was through networking, through local networking. And I think, do not despise the day of small beginnings. You do not know where things will take you. There was a lady who said, I don't speak up very well in meetings. I wonder if you can help me. And so I did a little session online for her. And she said, would you come and speak to our women's network? And I went, sure. She said, I'll pay you. I went, even better. And that happened to be the Ministry of Defence. She said, this is funny. She said, it's Abbey Wood. And I went, I thought, well, I know what Abbey Road is, but I've got no idea where Abbey Wood is. So I didn't want to sound ignorant, so I went. And, you know, when you go into it's high security and you do like fish out of water, do you know what I mean? Like, what am I doing here? But I had enough trust to realise that if they'd have asked me in there was something they saw that they wanted. And I've always maybe saw that into new ideas. So I spoke to them, and then it turned out we've got 150 managers that have to speak to their teams, and they get a cynical audience. And I thought, well, there's always a heckler in the audience, you know, I can deal with that. And so I ended up getting I suddenly went to earning as much in a day as I was in a month of training singers. And I sat in the car, and it was like, where's the greater purpose? What happens now? You have to make a change, whether you like it or not, even though you class yourself as a musician, even though you thought this was all you'd ever do. This is showing you that there is not only more for you, but there's more influence for you, because if you can influence an influencer, you influence a whole lot more people than you'll ever reach personally one-to-one. So that started the journey of Maverick Communication, which was the corporate training. And I then, you know, in terms of earning, I'd made in 7 months what it took me to make in 7 years by changing markets with my same skills. And it was only really then just before the pandemic when Paul became really seriously ill and the cancer spread into the lungs that I suddenly had to go at home, and I didn't know how to go online, and I had a pathological hatred of social media. So I'm still working my way through that as it were. Yeah. But just that, and realizing that one of the biggest, I suppose, skills that I can pass on, which sometimes I don't think is an obvious skill that people realize they need, is the resilience to pivot and to seek opportunities and to see them where they are. I think that's around everything that's going on.
But that's a really interesting point, is the whole thing is sometimes we change what we're doing, but actually it's not. It's about changing your audience.
Right.
And so for me, I was in that brand marketing world, working with clients to end people's lives rather than celebrate them, cigarettes, alcohol, whatever else. I came out of it thinking this whole thing is evil. I can't do this. And it wasn't until I was on a top of a minibus handing out aid in Romania, the penny dropped that I actually could use these skills for good rather than for evil. And I made that pivot of now saying, well, there's an audience that are being beaten up or ripped off or whatever, entrepreneurs, startups, charities, schools, in brand that they don't know about, that I could help them with and fix their problems with. And so it wasn't about changing what I was doing. Sometimes it's about changing the audience. Listen, Angela, this has been absolutely awesome. I know we could go for another hour easily, but thank you so much for you sharing your heart and giving us some amazing tips. I'm looking down that lens and I can see 500 people there. How do people get hold of you? Is it better to get you on LinkedIn or?
You can get me on LinkedIn, and there'll be a link. I'll give you a link for some of the material that we do, and you can find me at thevisibleclub.com.
Thank you so much. Really enjoyed it. Take care.
Pleasure.
Please watch my dad on Purpose People podcast and like and subscribe. Thank you. Bye.